Hello, welcome back to this final session of our study of Joshua. This is Allen and I'm Josh. And today we're closing out this study with Joshua chapter 24. As usual, for those who haven't had an opportunity to read the chapter, I'd encourage you to take a few moments, hit the pause button and read this chapter and then join us back for the study. And if this is the first time of you joining us, then I would encourage you to go back to the introduction of this study and take all the notes that you can up until this point and join us when you get back to that. Alan, how are you doing?
Doing well.
I've enjoyed it.
I have too.
It's almost sad it's coming to an end. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, here we are. A journey we began a while back. We're at chapter 24, the last of the chapters of Joshua, and in some ways the highlight of the book because the most famous statement ever made by Joshua is recorded in this chapter. Let's look at the keys of the chapter to start with. We call this chapter Joshua's death because his life comes to an end as recorded toward the end of this chapter. The key verse is 24:15, one of the great statements ever made, certainly one of the great statements of the Old Testament. The key thought is choose you this day, and every one of those words is important. Mm-hmm. Choose, that's what, if you don't make a decision about God, then you've made a decision about God. You have to make a choice. It's personal, you, and the when is this day. Choose you this day. Don't procrastinate, put it off. You have an opportunity, take it. And then the outline, there are 33 verses in this last chapter, which is one of the longer chapters, and there are 5 sections. So verses 1 through 13 is the Lord's summary, a very interesting section of the book is where God is giving his own interpretation of Israel's history, God speaking in the first person. And then 14 and 15 is Joshua's challenge. You remember, he's an old man exhorting his people. He's not going to be around to see the next generation grow up and serve God, but he wants them to do well. So he exhorts them, challenges them, not to follow idols, not to forsake God. 16 to 18, the people's response, they are in favor of Joshua's challenge. They said, we want to follow the Lord. He is our God. And then Joshua is insistent. He makes the point by reiterating the challenge again. And then we would say today, getting them to sign the contract. Right. He makes it official as an oath of the nation in verses 19 to 28. And then 29 to 33, deaths and burials. Deaths and burials. So 1 to 13, the Lord's summary. 14 and 15, Joshua's challenge. 16 to 18, the people's response. 19 to 28, Joshua's covenant. And 29 to 33, deaths and burials. Just some housekeeping things to let us know what, where these events, whatever happened to so-and-so. Well, you have the record of it. Right. Like we don't have a record of Caleb, which was a curiosity earlier in the book, but we do have a record of Eleazar and of Joshua. And so God is tidying up here at the end to let us have this information for our curiosity and also just for the history. Remember, this is the history section of the Old Testament. So history is about, births and dates and wars and borders. And that's, you have a lot of that here, especially the last 3 in the book. So let's just dive into the verse by verse. We'll come down to ground level. And the first thing we'll notice in the first verse is not a sermon, it's just a study called Leadership in Israel. So how did they set up their society? Well, you have it in this one verse, and I've highlighted it in my Bible. And Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel. So there's one category. And for their heads, second category, for their judges, third, for their officers, fourth, and they presented themselves before God. So you have 4 groups, elders, heads, judges, and officers, and I'm sure each one had a defined role to follow, military or civil or judicial or advice. And I don't know what all the roles were, but those were the people that the people looked to. They were the leaders. Now, we mentioned in the last chapter that God was front and center, and there were 16 verses, but 18 references to God. But in this chapter, Joshua's last chapter, God is mentioned 49 times.
Wow.
In 33 verses. And a lot of that is because God is speaking in the first person. So you have God saying, I did this and I did that. But it's quite interesting how the Old Testament is the book of God. And you find, if we wanted to flip through, I haven't done this for every book yet, but if you just wanted to flip through and just notice at that resolution where you see the whole page on one screen, how much yellow is on practically every page of the Old Testament. It's all about God. Mm-hmm. Now you shift to the New Testament, it's about Christ and the Holy Spirit. God is still there, the Father is still there, but the emphasis is much more on God the Father in the Old Testament, Jehovah, than it is on either the Spirit or the Son, although both are present in the Old Testament. All right, let's go into verse 2 now. And Joshua said unto all the people, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel. So I've highlighted Lord God of Israel in verse 2, not only because I always highlight God's references to God, but because God begins speaking in verse 2. Joshua says, God said this, but you have a direct quote of God, verse by verse, line by line, word by word, or maybe even that the Lord is taking over the speaking here, and they hear the voice of God. But I think it's the former, by the way the wording is found in verse 2. But this is first person spokesman for God's words. Right. Now, in fact, on the screen there, you can see right here, if you're looking at my screen, down through verse 13 are God's words. So I drew a line under verse 13 and drew an arrow pointing upward or back up the text and wrote God, and then an arrow pointing down from verse 14 and wrote Joshua. So you have an even division or an easy to define division. Above the line under verse 13 is God. Under the line under verse 13 is Joshua. So it's easy to see who the spokesman is if you mark that. So back in verse 2, these are the words of God. Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood. The word flood there is not the flood of Noah's day, but the flood of the Euphrates. It's a synonym for a flooded river, right. A large body of water. So I wrote the word Euphrates above flood in verse 2. And I think if you check the English Standard Version, it uses, and probably other versions, but the ESV has Euphrates there. And I think that makes this make more sense as we go through, because he's going to mention flood more than once here. In old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, the father of Nahor, so Abraham and Nahor brothers, their father Terah, they served other gods. Now, that may be a startling thought. Abraham came out of an idolatrous situation. It right. makes Genesis 12 make a lot more sense, doesn't it? Get you out from your land, or the Chaldees, your family, and your household. So why did he have to leave? Makes more sense if he's moving away from idolatry so he can practice monotheism. So this tells us that he grew up in a home that was polytheistic, that was pagan.
Right.
And they served other gods. So you could easily make the point here, and sometimes we need to make this point in our Bible studies with those that are not members of the church. Abraham broke family religious tradition. Now, we may be called to do that too, right. To honor God by breaking with family religious tradition. That's a challenge to many people, but it's a necessary challenge to answer. Just as Abraham said, God said, leave. Abraham doesn't argue about that. He didn't even know where he was going. God says, leave and I'll tell you on the way. So he leaves, and sure enough, God tells him, go to Canaan. and that's where he goes. So we have to encourage people to be like Abraham if that's required in order to be saved. Now, verse 3, and I took your father Abraham from the other side of the flood, the Euphrates, and led him throughout the land of Canaan. So he left that part of the world that's known as the Fertile Crescent, where so much of ancient history happened. Both the Babylonians and the Assyrians empires that carried God's people away at different times were located in that same Tigris-Euphrates valley, that Fertile Crescent. And that's where Abraham grew up. But he left that, Ur of the Chaldees, and it's quite a distance to Canaan from there.
Right.
But he made that journey. And then once he got there, God says, this is what I'm going to give you. He never owned any property there.
Right.
But his descendants did. Now I've drawn some lines, connections in verses 2 and 3. I'll just explain those quickly. So Abraham was made the promise after he left that I'll bless you. And that promise then went to Isaac. Then it went to Jacob and to Esau. Now, Jacob and Esau were brothers. And the seed promise goes through Jacob and not Esau. And he is mentioned in Esau here because I'll put the map back on the screen that you have Esau inherited property that the children of Israel are bordering here. So you have Edom, which is red, which is Esau. They came through that land on the way to inherit Canaan's land. So he mentions him here, Mount Seir, in the south end of the land of Canaan. Now we get back to chapter 24. So I've drawn a line from Esau to Mount Seir, and I've drawn a line from Jacob to Egypt, because Jacob and his family went down into Egypt, and that's where they came out from before the book of Joshua. So you have that God going over that history. God said, I took Abraham away from the Ur of the Chaldees, the other side of the flood of the river, and then I multiplied his seed. He was childless when he left, but God gave him Ishmael, which was not his will, but then he gave him Isaac, and after Isaac, Jacob and Jacob's 12 children, 12 sons, and now they became the tribes that inherited the land in this book. And I sent Moses also and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt. So God's just checking off the list of the things that he had done to bring God's people to this point. And I sent Moses, Aaron, plagued Egypt according to all that I did among them. And afterward I brought you out, and I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and ye came into the sea, and the Egyptians pursued after you. That's the Red Sea. After your fathers with chariots and horsemen under the Red Sea. And when they cried unto the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. Remember the 10 plagues, one of them was darkness. And then as they pursued they were being pursued as they left, God is going to make it impossible for the Egyptians to catch up to them. Brought the sea upon them. So the children of Israel crossed over the Red Sea on dry ground. The Egyptians went down into that same seabed, before the waters came back together, and they were going to use it the same way the children of Israel did. But children of Israel climbed out, and God said, not so fast. He brought the waters back down and drowned all of Pharaoh, not only Pharaoh, but all of his army, and killed all the horses and so forth. So their army was wiped out. The children of Israel were scot-free. God fought for them. He said, I did that. And then when they cried to the Lord, he put darkness, verse 7, the last part, and covered them. And your eyes have seen what I have done in Egypt, and ye dwelt in the wilderness a long season, 40 years. Now, that was not God's original intent. He intended for them to go straight into Canaan, and they were practically across the river from it at one point. But because of their sin, they had to wait. And that generation died, and then the younger generation came into the land of Canaan and conquered it. Now, verse 8, and I brought you into the land of the Amorites, which dwelt on the other side of Jordan. That'd be the east side. And they fought with you, and I gave you and I gave them into your hand, that you might possess their land. So Reuben, Gad, half tribe of Manasseh, that's where they live. They live on the other side. And I destroyed them from before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab. Well, back to our map just to get it. If you're a visual learner, this might help. So you have Moab, which is, so he talked about Edom, which is the far south. Now he's talking about Moabites at the southern tip of the Dead Sea. And now they're heading up this direction. And the Ammonites are here in the midsection, Transjordan, east of Jordan. And of course, that land that the 2.5 tribes inherited was Ammonite property before. And that's going to come up in the book of Judges later, which is quite interesting that the Ammonites are going to use revisionist history to say, you stole our land from us. And Israel's, the judge says, you keep the property that your God gives you, and we'll keep the property that our God gives us. That's what God talked about here. God gave them that land. Now, we are in verse 9, 10. The middle of 9, warred against Israel, and sent and called Balaam the son of Beor to curse you. But I would not hearken unto Balaam. I wouldn't listen to that guy. He wants to curse my children? No way. I don't listen to that prayer. Therefore, he blessed you still. Every time he tried to get me to curse you, I blessed you. That taught him a lesson. So I delivered you out of his hand. And you went over Jordan and came unto Jericho. So they finally made it into Canaan's land that had been promised to Abraham so long before. They finally reached it. And the men of Jericho fought against you. The Amorites, the Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, Jebusites, I delivered them into your hand. That's a lot of history covered in that one verse.
Absolutely.
That's a lot, 7 nations of Canaan plus. And God said, I'll just tick them off the list. I conquered all of them and gave you victory over them. And verse 12, and I sent the hornet before you. I think that's an interesting phrase, I sent the hornet. But God's fighting for them. Can you imagine being in a battle situation and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're lined up against Israel, and out of nowhere, the hornets come in and buzzing around your head? I mean, you couldn't focus on the battle, which drave them out from before you, even the 2 kings of the Amorites, but not with the sword, nor with the bow. No, just insects, just bees. I drove them out from you. But God is so creative.
Right.
It's humorous often, the things they got. I mean, how did he rebuke Balaam, with his donkey talking to him? You think about it, you just stand back from that and you just try to picture what's happening there. And he's talking to his donkey, and his donkey's asking questions, and Balaam's like, nay. I think they've switched languages. Well, God is creative. God is able to make his victories humorous against his enemies, make them look silly. Now, verse 13, and I have given you a land for which you did not labor. You didn't have to clear the forest lands here to build your cities. No, it was already cleared. And cities which you built not. You didn't have to dig up those rocks and lay those walls and level up those streets. That was already done for you. That you dwell in, and you dwell in them, and the vineyards and the olive yards which you planted not do you eat. So you go out there and pick from fruit that you didn't have to wait for it to mature, the trees or the vines to mature to produce, already were producing. I gave that to you. Now, that's the end of God's speech in verse 13. And verse 14 is where Joshua begins to speak to the people. Right. Now, therefore, fear the Lord, Joshua says, and serve him in sincerity and in truth. Did you think that was New Testament doctrine? John 4:24, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. But that's not New Testament doctrine. I mean, it is now, but it originally was Old Testament doctrine, wasn't it? Serve him in sincerity and truth. Now, there's a difference in worship and service, of course. Worship is more specialized. Service is all of life. We just are servants to God. Worship is intentional when we go to a place with the people of God, or we go to a place to worship God privately, which is also acceptable. But whenever we do either one, we have to do it from the right attitude and according to how He wants it done.
Right.
So spirit and in truth. Now, the next part, and put away the gods. So now, therefore, fear the Lord. That's one. Serve Him with spirit and sincerity and truth. That's two. 3, put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood. Don't worship those gods from the Euphrates, from our tradition. Now, and in Egypt, and serve you the Lord. So there were gods that were on the other side of the river. There were different gods that were down in Egypt. The sun god, and they have a lot of gods that they worship, and the Israelites lived among them. But God says, don't bring their gods with you. Those are not real gods. Don't worship the traditional gods of your ancestors. Don't worship the gods that you learned about when you were in Egypt, but instead worship the God that's been here all along. Serve ye the Lord. Now that brings us to verse 15, which is the key verse of the chapter. And I want to spend a little more time here, and I think we have time to discuss this in some detail, but let's read it first and then do an analysis of it and some application from it. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, if it seems evil unto you to serve the Lord. The word evil there could be translated foolish. Or we might say today, if it seems like a bad idea to you to serve the Lord.
Right. That's
the meaning here. Choose you this day whom ye will serve. In other words, you're a free moral agent. You're a free moral person. You can make your own choices. God's not going to make you worship Him. He could. He's omnipotent, but He won't.
Right.
He lets you make the choice. So choose you this day whom ye will serve. Choose reminds us of Matthew 6:24, where Jesus said, no man can serve God and mammon. You can't serve two masters. Either you serve the one and hate the other, or cleave the one and despise the other. You can't serve God and mammon. So it is true that a person can serve two gods, but not at the same time. Right. In other words, you could have been an idolater at earlier point in your life, learned of God, and switched your allegiance to worship only one God. So you have served two gods, but you cannot serve one God on Saturday and worship a different God on Sunday. God will not allow it. It doesn't mean that it's not physically possible for you to be in both worship services, but God won't accept it. Your idol God, there's no God to accept it anyway. Mm-hmm. But you could be acceptable to the people of who are worshiping with you, but God wouldn't accept it. Now, choose you this day. That's 2 Corinthians 16. Today is the day of salvation. In fact, today is the only day any of us has, because yesterday's past and we can't rewrite that. It's already written. Tomorrow, we're not there yet. And when we get there, it will be today. So we can never do anything tomorrow. Anything that we ever do is today. And that's why we have to accept that today is the day of salvation. And you can say, well, I'm going to serve God later, or I'm going to be baptized tomorrow, or when I get out of high school, or when I get married, or at some future point. But the truth is, you cannot make decisions for tomorrow. Now, it may be that you will do what you said you will do if God spares your life to get there.
Right.
But why would you give the devil another day? Has the devil ever done anything good for you? And further, the longer you stay in sin, the harder it is to leave it.
Right.
Because Satan has his hooks. his claws. He gets them into us. And I think about the Lilliputians, what is that old story about the man that had all the little men around him, and they tied him down. Their ropes were like little strings to him,
Right.
So he was so big, they were so small. But enough threads can bind you. That's the way sin is. When you first start with sin, it's not a habit. Well, so I can take it or leave it, and maybe you can leave it. But you keep toying with it. You keep playing with it. You keep enjoying the pleasure sins of the far country. And one day, it will not be so easy to leave as it used to be. The addictions of the far country are harder we can lie to ourselves and say, not a problem.
Right.
But how many people have found that, it is a problem, you know? And even with help, have trouble ever getting back where they used to be. So today is the right day to obey God, not tomorrow. Because don't give the devil any more of your life. Do not allow sin to take, there's a word that's used in military terms, a beachhead, where the Allied forces came into Normandy and they had to establish a beachhead before they could invade the Germans who were occupying France. Normandy's in France, of course, but they had to have a place to land. And once they got set up on the land, and that was Hitler's whole strategy, was to build that wall along the coast and to fortify it and to keep them from ever being able to get on the land. But they were able to get a beachhead. So you don't want to allow the devil to have a beachhead in your life, a base of operations to work from, to get habits and people and influences that are already they're at home with me. You always want to keep them away. Temptation's around us, but don't let that habit get in you. That's the idea of this day, whom you will serve. Now, the keynote there is we have a choice of our master, but we do not have a choice of whether we will serve. That's a given. You can say, I'm not serving anybody. That's not how it works.
Right.
You're either going to serve God or you're going to serve the devil. Now, I sometimes illustrate that this way. The devil wants it to seem like you have freedom when you're, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want to morally. You can drink whatever or put in your body whatever. There's no rules for you. Okay. Well, in that sense, no rules. But here's what happens. I grew up, I guess that there were seatbelt laws probably when I was a young child, but I'm not sure those didn't come along, at least where I was till later. So I remember my dad had a pickup truck. We lived in the country and there were country roads around. And sometimes he would let me sit in his lap while he was driving the pickup truck. And he would let me drive. I put my hands on the wheel, and his hands were off the wheel. I thought I was driving, but I wasn't really driving.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I couldn't even reach the pedals anyway, but I wasn't even driving because as soon as I started going toward the ditch, what happened? Boom, his big hands came and put it back. And he let me think I was driving, but I really wasn't. That's the way the devil is. If you sit in the devil's lap, he's going to let you drive. Right. He's going to let you feel like you're in control. But eventually you're going to try to turn your life in a direction he doesn't want you to go. And you're going to find it's really hard to turn it.
It's a good illustration.
Because sin has, we can play. The Japanese have an old saying about drinking. They say, first the man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes the man. There's a progress to sin.
Right.
And there are, drugs that you can take one time and you're an addict, and addiction can be hard to overcome. So we can say we're playing with sin. I can leave it. I can take it. But sins are hard to leave, especially pleasure sins, sins of the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very hard to leave because pleasure is addictive.
Right.
And then people who say, well, I It might not be as easy. So the wise person never goes down that road. They never begin, because you give the devil an opportunity to be your master, and he doesn't want to give it back.
Mm.
You know, if you give God the reins, then God will bless you every day. The devil will curse you every day. You can count on it. But the devil's a liar and a deceiver, and he will make it seem early on with the pleasures of sin for a season that this is the way to go, but that's short-sighted. And ultimately, it's, what is it? Proverbs 13:15 says the way of the transgressor is hard.
Right.
It's not an easy life to live. And I've been around a few addicts and a few drunks, or alcoholics, we would say today, and I pity them. You know, it's hard. It's sad.
Right.
And I weep with them. You know, I've been in jails, prisons, visiting them. It wouldn't be there if it weren't for drink or drugs. But now they're there, and they're going to be there. And a lot of times it's just a revolving door. When they get out, they get back in. You know, it's just really sad. And some very talented people. Come from good families.
Mm-hmm.
But sin did them in, and they chose the wrong master. Choose the right master.
You know, it's interesting, real quick, how many will stand at judgment and enter into torment, not because of a lack of belief or even a lack of desire,
Right.
but just an overconfidence in tomorrow.
You're exactly right.
So
you're exactly right.
With addiction, with judgment, with death, however it plays out, there's always that one day that it's too late. For those who are in torment, it's just, there will be a day where it's too late.
And you don't know when that day will be.
Absolutely. It may not be dead. It may be just apostasy. You've hit that point of no return, which Hebrews talks about. But that overconfidence in tomorrow, and I read that somewhere in a quote or something like that, and it stuck.
Absolutely. Hebrews 6:6-8 you're referring to there, and I think about Ecclesiastes 12. Remember now thy creed in the days of thy youth.
Right.
In other words, give God your life in your youth if you know of God. Don't say, well, I'll do it later, because he continues, remember now thy creed in the days of thy youth, when the evil days come not,
right,
nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. You know, there have been young people, and I've known some of these, and you have too, that they were really good young people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they had good hearts. They were sincere. They were active with the church, and they responded well to the word of God for a while, but they did not obey the gospel. They said, I'll do it later. Or maybe they did, but then they said, well, I'm not going to serve God right now. I'm going to enjoy sin, but I'll come back to God. If you go talk to them now, and we've all had those conversations, like, the years have drawn nigh.
Right.
When they have no pleasure in them anymore. They used to have pleasure. I mean, they enjoyed the youth group experiences as much as I did or you did. And they served God. They sang with the same enthusiasm and beautiful voices that we did, but now haven't sung God a song in a long time. And maybe even, I think about them in the worship service. If you could get them to come, maybe it's family friend day and you say, just come. So they're there. You remember sitting by them in the youth group on the second row years ago, and their Bible's open and they're taking notes, your Bible's open, and you're just basically hanging on every word of the preacher. And now they're there for family friend day and get there, right about the time it starts, sit back there. They look like they're bored out of their skull.
Right.
And then, it's like so they're looking at the watch. When's this going to be over? I don't feel comfortable. This is awkward. You know what happened? They were touched with the gospel back there. Just bored.
Yeah.
Bored with it. Don't let your heart get hard to truth. Now, if I will say this, it's possible to go too far and not, like you said, not be able to come back. But here is a good question to ask yourself. Do I fear that that's happened to me? If I still fear it, maybe it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
But you better act on your fear before long. Because you're, like you say, there's a day where it's the past point of no return. So remember now thy Creator. I want to always encourage young people, obey the gospel as soon as you're old enough to be in sin, to know that you've sinned and to know the truth, and then be faithful all the days of your life. That's the best life to live.
Absolutely.
And yes, you'll sin. Yes, you'll have to repent. Yes, there will be things that you will regret, but there won't be nearly as many sins or as regrettable sins as those that go into the world and play in the far country. And, for every prodigal that comes home, like the one in Luke 15, there are 10 or 100 that don't.
Right.
I always think, well, I'll be the prodigal. I'll come home somewhere. Well, I hope you do, but don't count on that. Because the far country is hard to leave. It's hard to come home from.
I had a buddy who did that, and he made the point that at the beginning when he was dabbling, he grew up in the church, so to start dabbling, it was uncomfortable. Like he didn't feel right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the more he did it, the more comfortable he became. And fortunately, he's come back and all that. But he made the point that coming back was uncomfortable. And that was in like to your point, when you leave and sin in the world becomes comfortable, returning becomes uncomfortable. Like you said, the board, and it, maybe
or
even
what
guilt.
Are people thinking? And who's looking? Was he looking at me like that?
Absolutely.
Kind of
and he said that was a transition that he had to, and fortunately, someone wise in his life basically told him that to be comfortable in that situation, there's a period of discomfort. And
just don't give into
it. Right. And so, like you said, it's harder once it becomes, uncomfortable.
Let's move into the next part, whether the gods of which your father served on the other side of the flood. So we defined that earlier, and you see it coming up here again. This is the third time. So the gods on the other side of the Euphrates, they worship the moon god in Ur of the Chaldees, the best I can tell. So don't worship the moon god. Don't worship the sun god of the Egyptians. Worship the God who made the moon and the sun, the true God of heaven. Or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. Well, that would be those Transjordan tribes that are, they're dwelling in that land, and whose land you dwell for. But as for me and my house, here is true leadership. Me and my house, we've made up our minds. We already chose. We will serve the Lord. So I wrote 3 words with that last phrase. Decision, they had made one. Resolve, they had entered it. And family leadership, he was demonstrating it. 3 important concepts there for a father, really for anybody, but especially Joshua. And this is a family verse. This isn't Joshua, the leader of all of Israel. This is Joshua at home with his family. Now, he is speaking to Israel, and he's trying to be an example to them, but he's not speaking as the leader. He's speaking as the father, as the husband, as the family, the head of a family unit. So decision, we've already made it. Resolve, we're not going to change it. Family leadership, this is not just me, but all of us. He was really exerting influence in the sphere where God put him. That's his home base, home. We will serve the Lord. So that shows determination. Now, before we go into the people's response, I want to analyze this verse maybe 5 different ways. Let's just spend a little time here. It's such a great verse. Let's start with how to turn your life around. That really dovetails with what we've been talking about. So there are 3 points, and they are the same points we were talking about, but just a different way to express it. So how to turn your life around. Number 1 is decision, and you can write that above the word choose. And Revelation 3:15 fits with that, and also 1 Samuel 18:21. I think that should be 1 Kings. Let me correct that. 1 Kings 18:21, which is where Elijah says, how long we halt between 2 opinions? If God be God, worship him. If Baal be God, serve him. And the people answered him not a word. So they didn't choose. But by not choosing, they rejected God.
Right.
You know, the same thing is true today. So those verses, I think, support that point. The second point in the sermon on how to turn your life around is the timing of it. So decision is point one. Point two is timing. And that's this day. And we discussed how, you can't change yesterday, can't do anything tomorrow. You can only do today. And then the third point is, there are 4 points, but the third one is your master. Choose your master. How to turn your life around? Submit to the master, the one who's going to help you and love you. And that is God. And then the fourth one, and this one is the long-term one. All the first three you can do in a moment. You can do in a sermon. You can do today. And you should. But the fourth one is making it stick. And that's the word determination. At the end of the verse, we will serve the Lord. Will is a word of determination, not shall. Will is the stronger word. We will, the human will is involved in that. So decision, timing, master, and determination. That's how you turn your life around. Stick with it. Make your choice, and then absolutely refuse to go back. That's the only way to change it. Start a new habit, which is what you were saying about your friend, overcoming the awkwardness of it.
Right.
Now, let me do a quick sermon on Old Testament worship styles. We've been living in a time of what denominations call worship wars. You mentioned earlier about the older people and the younger people. Mm-hmm. Well, there's been some wars in congregations. It's been a bigger news item outside the Lord's church, but some of this has spilled over into the Lord's church too. And these worship wars, are we going to have contemporary worship, or are we going to have traditional worship? Are we going to do new things and be a little looser? Or are we going to be stay with the scriptures? Those questions. Well, even though worship wars is something I never heard of until, fairly recent years, it's been around for a long time. It's actually in this verse.
Oh, wow.
Now, let's analyze it. So, Old Testament worship styles is the sermon. Old Testament worship styles. The first point is traditional worship. That sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? It's the middle part of the verse. The gods that were on the other side of the flood. That was their tradition handed down from Abraham's family, was to worship, idolatry, paganism. The second one is contemporary worship. And that is, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. That's contemporary worship. You're dwelling here. This is what's popular in this part of the world. These people, that's how they worship. Well, a lot of people today are more impressed with the worship of the denominations and their generation, their friends, than they are with the God of heaven and the way he set it up. So you have traditional worship, you have contemporary worship, but the third one is scriptural worship. We will serve the Lord. We have the same three choices today. Traditional worship. Well, if your traditions were scriptural, that's a good thing. But if your traditions were not, well, don't worship according to tradition. Right. The Pharisees were guilty of that. Mm-hmm. Their hearts were not in it, but they served tradition, and Jesus kept running into that all the time and criticizing them. Matthew 15, 7-9 is a good example of that. Mark 7, 7-9. Good examples of traditional worship or traditionalism, ritualism. The heart's not in it. It's not according to truth. It's more about how a person appears than what they are. Contemporary worship may be the opposite of that. A lot of times it's very energetic, fervent, joyful. Those are not bad things, but there's no truth. There's no guidance. Sometimes I illustrate it like this. In order to have true worship, it's like having a river. In order to have a river, you have to have two things. You have to have water, and you have to have banks.
Right.
If you only have banks, you don't have a river, you got a ditch. But if you only have water and you don't have banks, you don't have a river, you got a swamp. In order to have a river, now rivers are productive. You can fish rivers, you can take goods to the market on rivers, you can use rivers as a division between a state. Swamps are not like that. And certainly ditches are not like that. Now, the way you apply that to worship is the water is the spirit of worship. Joy, reverence, thanksgiving, the attitude that I should bring to worship. But the banks are the truth. You got to have the channel, the guidelines. So our worship was singing, prayer, Lord's Supper, preaching, and giving. Those are the parameters of the New Testament worship. That's how they did it. That's how we should do it. But we shouldn't do those things with just a ho-hum attitude, just to going through the motions. When's this thing going to be over? I got to get to the restaurant, or I got to go play golf. If that's my attitude, if my mind's somewhere else, then I'm not really worshiping. Worship's going on around me, but I'm not a part of it. I got to, just being in a hen house doesn't make you a chicken. If you're just in a worship service, it doesn't make you a worshiper.
Right.
You just being in a store doesn't make you a consumer or a purchaser. You got to buy something. Same thing with worship. So I think you see that here. Worship styles has been around a long time.
Right.
Traditional, contemporary, no, scriptural. Let's do scriptural. Now, another study here in verse 15, 3 applications of sincerity and truth. I mentioned this at verse 14, but we didn't put it down like this. But you must have sincerity and truth in 3 situations. Number 1 is service. God doesn't accept service that's not, for instance, service that's, well, I got to do it. Sometimes you have a caregiver and it's long-term caregiving, and maybe it's just a person gets really tired and worn out, and they may become so frustrated they don't want to do it, but there's nobody else. I got to do it, and the person feels bad that you're trying to help because they don't want to be a burden. But God doesn't accept that I got to do it. He wants us to serve out of love. 1 Corinthians 13 says anything that's done that's not out of love doesn't count. That's the Simon Says of Christianity. So that's number 1 is service. Number 2 is worship. And we mentioned John 4:24. And then number 3 is our commitment, which is Joshua 24:15. So sincerity and truth must be involved in our commitment in this sense. A lot of people have made commitments to error, to false religion, and others have made true commitments that they were insincere in making because, well, my wife, she'll make it hard on me if I don't do what she wants me to do. Or I got to get my parents off my back, so I'm going to make a commitment to the church. I'll be baptized. Well, if you're not sincere, it doesn't do you any good. Right. It may do you some surface level good with relationships, but with God, it doesn't. So make the right commitment to God, but do it for the right reason. So all 3 of those, commitment, service, and worship, require both sincerity and truth. I think that's important for us to realize, because I'll tell you another thing that happens with this. We wonder why we're losing young people from the church, and there are different reasons. Primarily, it has to go back to the home and the family. The example and the instruction in the family unit is the primary reason. It's not on the church, although the church should help and can help. But I'll also say this, and this ties in with both family and church, but young people are turned off by hypocrisy, by indifference, by lukewarmness. Mm-hmm. They are drawn to dedication, commitment, sacrifice. So if I am demonstrating a kind of religion, a kind of Christianity before my kids for all those years, formative years, when they're small, if I let just anything interrupt my worship for God, we won't go tonight because I'm whatever, any excuse not to go. They see that. They know that. If they see me making compromises and telling half-truths or lies to get out of a bind, or they see me compromising the morality of Scripture with drinking or smoking or whatever it is. They sometimes we try to hide things from children, but hey, children are so observant, they see things, right? So if I have demonstrated that kind of relationship with God when they're growing up, don't be surprised if they leave the church.
Right.
Because you haven't shown them sincerity and truth. But it's hard to leave a congregation that teaches and practices. Before I go there, I'll finish the illustration. Let me talk about the church. Let's say it's a good family, but in the church, they don't take it seriously. The elders and the preacher and the members, it's more just a country club kind of atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just really first century Christianity that this is life for us.
Right.
Children grow up in that environment. They're not impressed with it. And then some religious teacher, some religious friend comes in, shows them a kind of religion that is serious about it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're like, man, they're impressed with that. They should have been impressed with their religion prior to that, and not some false religion that got that part right in the sense that they're committed to it. Don't be surprised if a young person growing up in that kind of family or in that kind of church doesn't stay with the church and the religion of the family.
Right.
The time to fix that was yesterday. Mm-hmm. But if we can't do anything yesterday, so let's do it today. But the time to fix is immediately in both situations. The elders have to stand up and be serious about withdrawing fellowship from someone who doesn't do right, or making sure that people dress appropriately for worship and for activities of the church. Their modesty does matter because it's a part of the Scriptures. Or, everything that the world has encroached into the church, we have to say, we're going to stand where the Bible stands. We're going to do what the Scriptures say. And if we do that, yes, it may offend somebody. And some of the young people might even be turned off by it initially, but you stick with it and you tell them why and you show from the Scriptures, they will respect it.
Absolutely.
And they want to be a part of that. Everybody wants to be part of a religion that matters,
mm-hmm.
not a religion that fits me, but I have to fit too. So you see that. All right, let's go into these other studies. We have about 5 or 6 minutes here. So let me do a study called Analysis of a Great Statement. This is a different way to look at the same verse. The word choose, volitional versus traditional. Traditional is the easy way out. Making a choice is the hard way, but it's the right way. Volitional versus traditional. Then the word you, personal versus corporate. Corporate in the sense of the crowd. Am I going to go along with the crowd, or am I going to make a personal decision? Well, Joshua says it in the personal. Choose you this day,
mm-hmm.
not the group, individual. Number 3, this day, critical versus optional. Optional says I can do it another day. Critical says I do it today. And then serve, vocational, which means your job, versus hobby, which means something that you do whenever. It's not important.
Right.
It's a hobby. So volitional, personal, critical, and vocational is the right way to approach religion. Traditional, corporate, optional, and hobby is the wrong way. Your religion is not your hobby.
Right.
Your religion is your life. So it's vocational. And it's even more important than your vocation in the way we typically use that word, which means your job. Your religion is far more important than your job, but it's far, far more important than your hobby. It's your religion. That's the thing in life that matters the most. All right, the next study is, and I really like this analysis. I just like this kind of study where you look at all the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So here are 4 possibilities with families. 4 possibilities with families. I'll show you where I'm going so it makes sense. So the first one is neither me nor my family is religious. That's the worst case scenario. Neither me nor my family. Joshua says for me and my family. right? So one possibility would be the opposite of Joshua, neither me nor my family. That fits most of the people. They're not religious at all. Neither
Right.
the father nor the family is religious. Worst case. Second is me without my family. Well, I meet these guys sometimes, or sometimes it's the mother and the wife. Me without my family. He goes, but she won't go with him. His wife won't go, and his children stay home with her, or she goes and he won't go. So that's better than neither one going, but it's not ideal, is it? So what about number 3? My family without me. I see that sometimes too, and you do too, where a wife brings her children. It's hard. She's got 3 little children and she's trying to, take one to the bathroom, and it's just hard to keep them all quiet. And then, but she's there. She loves the Lord, but he's not there to help her. Well, that's my family without me. That's not being a good father. That's not being a good husband. But then number 4, both me and my family. That's the best case. So 4 possibilities, neither me nor my family, me without my family without me, or me and my family. And really, that last one brings unity to the family, brings joy, and it gives you the environment to help your children make it to heaven. So let's finish this last part. Verse 17, for the Lord our God brought us out of Egypt. He demonstrated his power, and he drove out the enemies. Verse 18, and Joshua said, you cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. That doesn't mean you can't serve the Lord. It's impossible. What it means is you can't serve the Lord if you don't take it seriously, if you don't do what I've done. That's verse 20, and I've drawn a line from 15 down to 20. Then you get into this last section where you have Joshua made a covenant with the people, 25 and 26, and then he uses a memorial stone, which is interesting, in verse 27 that was just there, and he pointed it out, and he said, this rock is a witness, because this rock heard all of our words today. Well, the rock didn't hear any words, but it was there, and every time they walk by that rock, they say, that's the rock that Joshua pointed to when we made the covenant. So it's a visual reminder. And then verse 29, Joshua died, so you can mark that. They buried him outside of his inheritance, Timnath-Serah. And then they buried Joseph's bones that they had carried with them all these years out of Egypt in verse 32. And they buried them in Shechem, and that's in the property of Manasseh. And then the last verse, Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him in the hill that pertaineth to Phinehas, his son, which was given to Mount Ephraim. So 3 funerals here, Joshua, Joseph, and Eleazar, as the book comes to a close.
That's great. It's been a great study, Allen. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. And I hope you've benefited from as much as I know I have, for sure.
I've enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.